Don't be a smart.
You taught me how to.
Okay, are you ready?
I'm ready.
I have a few questions.
Well, of course, I'm Brian, and was it 16th of August, 1930, in 336 Ambilo Road, Durban, naturally Natal. I know that my father's name is Benjamin, and he was born in England. I don't know what date at all, and I know my mother's name was Mona, M-O-N-A, and she was born in Durban. As I say, born on Ambilo Road, that was the name, well, that was the place there. It was very much of in the backyard. There was the workshop. Not that my father was a printer, but the workshop was the builder's workshop, because that was what that part of the family did. It was a famous thing, builders and contractors. And yeah, that was their job. And there were carpenters and such like people all working in the back. And in those days, of course, there was no, what do you call these things, electric saws or anything like that, you know, everything was saw, 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 and plane with a hand and do things like that. So everything was very handy. Well, I had one sister, her name is Moira, and she was born 1 year after I was. And that we all lived like that. The house where we lived, as I say, was 336 Ambilo Road in Durban, and the bottom of the house, we lived in the top up part. The bottom of the house, the family lived, and at the back of the house, as I said, was the workshop. But my father wasn't involved in that sort of stuff. He was a printer, bookbinder, whatever else one wants to say. My earliest memories were the, as I said before, clip clop, clip clop. That was the milk van going past, and clip clop, that was the old, what do you call it, bread van. And then of course the sawing of wood by hand was replaced after a long, long while by the cutting of the wood and stuff needed for the builders by something electric. We only acquired a car when my father came back from the war in 1945 or 46 or something. Otherwise, we caught the bus. Oh no, there was a tram first and then the buses came. And quite interesting, one of my uncles was a bus driver. A very respected job. Durban, as it is now, was a two-street town, West Street and Smith Street. And on the corner of our road, which was, I think, MacDonald Road and Ambilo Road, there was a tea room and a butcher. that was it. We lived.
The simple.
We, when I say we, I'm talking about our family, particularly, did not acquire a car until after the war. Quite a long time, about 47 or so. I remember thousands of soldiers, not only our troops, our people, but the convoys and the ships arriving in Durban and being held out in what we would now look at and say, well, that wasn't the harbour, it was, you know what it's like out there. And there were as many as 50 or 60 ships all the time, lots of them full of troops, others full of bloody whatever it was, scuttling amongst them with the destroyers and minesweepers and things like that. And the beach itself was not quite prohibited, but it was full of barbed wire.
Why was that?
And you could only get there by going through it and all the rest of it. Otherwise, but my father went to the war, and my uncles went to the war, so there was my mother and her 3 sisters, and they did quite a lot of entertaining, shall we say. Plenty of cups of tea, and then they used to go to a place called the Victoria Club or League or whatever else it was, and of course they danced with the troops coming through. Then of course we always remembers, as I said, the clip clop, you know.
And what was that?
Everything was clip clop, because hardly anybody had vehicles. And pulling the bread van and pulling the milk thing and doing this and doing that was all done by horses. It took a long time, as far as I can recall, for, let's say, the acquisition by everybody and anything of vehicles. The first school that I went to was Miss Daintree, and that was, what do you call it? Kindergarten now, I suppose, eh? In the Presbyterian Hall in Freer Road. I think the hall is still there. And the church, that was followed by MacDonald Road Junior School, which was in walking distance. That was followed by what? Penzance Road, eh? Well, Penzance Road. We had to catch a bus there. And that was followed by Glenwood High School. I was very fortunate enough to have I suppose a cousin, one would say, who had a boyfriend who had a job at the Electricity Supply Commission, ESCOM, and so I managed to get a job, you know, in those days. Well, you were what's called an office boy. You ran all the messages. I did a little bit of, what do you call it, after school education, but only from my own. I can assure you that I never got any assistance from my parents. Whatever I did on my own.
And what were your parents like?
I think they were very good. Very difficult to remember, eh? My father, of course, he was in the printing trade, and he had an interesting experience. We had an interesting experience when the war came along in 1939. Of course, all the men in Durban were in the Royal Durban Light Infantry. A few were in the Natal-mounted rifles, not too many. That was more central Natal. So they were the Royal Durban Light Infantry, and the very first or second day after South Africa joined in or declared war against the Germans, and they got on board the troop train, you have to go and have a look at the old, what do you call it? Railway station, eh? It was a magnificent old place. I think it's still there. And they got on board the troop train, the Royal Durban Light Infantry, and naturally went as far as Maritzburg, where the camp was, a place called Orreby. So he left there that afternoon, and the next morning I woke up and heard, which was his habit, and there he was. His name had been called out amongst 10 or 15 others and told that they were, in inverted commas, key men. In other words, they were required in their industry to keep that thing going. So those few guys came back under escort, moaning like mad, and he spent the next 4 or 5, what the war was about 6 or 8 years long, so he spent at least 3 or 4 years working at his job. And then the famous South African defeat at Tobruk, you obviously know about that one. We lost about 10,000 men. They surrendered. They had no other chance. So once they'd done that, then he said, well, like lots of other guys, I'm going. Cheerio, guys. And he went off to the war. Now, it was very interesting, I think, during the war, that the ladies were all involved, shall we say. When I say involved, there were various clubs like the Victoria Club and such like things in town, and people had their own places where the troops were entertained with cups of tea and the usual sort of thing, and there was dancing. And when I say the troops, here I'm talking about the British troops that came around the Cape in troop ships so that they could go up. Now they came around the Cape so they could get up to the Middle East and go and fight in the desert warfare. They couldn't go through the Mediterranean. It was far too dangerous for them. So there were lots and lots of these entertainment, shall we say, clubs, and that's what so many of the ladies did, because there were virtually only ladies around. Unless you had a specific, as they said, key industry job, you went. But when I say you went, you do understand that the South African Army, even in those days, was voluntary. You were not conscripted or forced to go into it. So it was, yeah, there we go, guys. And that's what my dad did, or naturally with the rest of the gang. And he had an interesting thing, because I think I told you that when they got to Orby camp up in Pietermaritzburg, about 10 guys' names were called out, and under escort they all came back to Durban because their jobs were classified as key jobs. In other words, they had to keep whatever industry they were working in, they had to keep it going. But when, as I say, when Tobruk fell, the famous battle, or non-battle, he just said cheerio. And he rejoined, but of course the Royal Durban Light Infantry had virtually disappeared. So he, during the war, he was a very interesting guy, because he did first aid, shall we say, in inverted commas, but he really went up the hill, you know. And he used to spend virtually, or most of his spare time over the weekend and all the rest of that, helping out in hospitals and all sorts of things like that. The ladies did their duty, serving tea and going to dances, and that was the war.
Now, what was your mother like?
Hmm?
Your mother, what was she like?
What was she like? She was a very, I don't quite know how one puts it in those days. Her job was to look after us. She was a very nice lady. But you know, Brian, like well, so many of the people where we came from, their, let's say, education as such stopped at standard 6, because they had to go out and work, do something to keep the families going. So, you know, they were working when they were 15, 16, 17. But you know, when one looks back like that, it was quite a good thing, because that meant that us children, shall we say, had to try to understand that we had a job to do, and that was to, you know, help keep the house going and all the rest of it, as well as do your schoolwork.
Have you visited anywhere outside of South Africa?
Yeah, the Range Marks. That was our, it was always the Shell people's first stop. But of course there were ships, passenger trips, that sort of tourist ships. And they always stopped off at Cape Town, Port Elizabeth, Durban, picked up some people, and the trip was then to go from up to Beira and then back again. And I'm not too sure, but I think we did that trip 3 times because the old man liked doing it. And the other thing, of course, it was probably affordable. But there was no such a thing as, what do you call it, we like that, into the bush, you know, that sort of thing. There was nothing like that. And the other thing was that we only acquired a vehicle when I was about 17. That was after the war.
Where, when and how did you meet your spouse?
Me, when did you meet me?
Well, there was, I belonged to a sports club in Durham called Brea Rovers. I played cricket and hockey for them. We also had a rugby and, we had rugby, squash, you know, drinking of course. And it was one day, one Saturday, I think, after cricket, I suppose, when one of the guys who were well-known entertainers either came to the club or phoned up and said, we are short of people, short of men. Come along to the place where they lived, which we did, and it was there that I met your mother. I mean your grandma.
Just so you know, Gogo, you're in the shot.
What? So there we are. That was it. It was quite an occasion. We managed to kind of get together.
Was it love at first sight?
Hmm?
Was it love at first sight?
One doesn't know. Very difficult thing, but certainly there was an awful lot of attraction. And, well, what did we do, eh? Eventually got engaged or something. I think she's gone to sleep.
Ah.
It was very, you know, and let me tell you what happened then after that. Well, you know, we got married, eventually engaged, married, and I just can't remember. Well, we only just got married, and we got, yeah, I think so. We moved into a little flat.
We were planning to go overseas.
Oh, that's right. That was the whole idea. Until one day this guy came along and said, Brian so-and-so has resigned. He was so-and-so up in Boxburg. He has resigned, and because he is going to an opposition company, the resignation takes place with immediate effect. Immediate effect. As I always say, I could feel the dragon behind me as well. Immediate effect. And they meant it. They chucked him out and they sent me up there with your grandmother. Virtually straight away. I think they even had to pay for half our rent at the flat. Anyway, that's how it all started.
So So how many children do you have?
We have 4 children: Richard, Bruce, Michael, Nicholas.
And what was it like raising them?
What was it like?
Raising them.
Raising them. Well, I think it was very interesting, and I believe that the boys, as such, but you know, your grandmother is the person who raised them. I always seemed to be working, and she had to look after them. How many years did we spend in Benoni?
About 3.
Is that all?
Bruce and Richard were both born there.
And I would almost say, luckily, somebody resigned in Durban, and they simply said, and as they used to do in those days, "You are going." And we came back to Durban. And where did we live first of all?
In Fielden Drive.
Did we? Fielden Drive. Well, there we are.
In Durban, yeah.
That was a very good buy. What do you feel? No, you didn't.
Well, we decided it was too small, so we moved to Westville.
So we then went to where?
We moved to Westville.
Well, I'm pretty old, you know. Well, you know, we moved from Fielden Drive because even though the people around were quite nice, we didn't quite, I always had a feeling that it was, this is what it's like now. It was, there were more opportunities, shall we say, for us and for the boys' education if we went to the Westville. So that was a decision. I would say, hey, Brian, that it wasn't a bad one. Because we got into the community was a growing up one. So it was a matter of, everybody went to, all the kids went to that school, all the kids went to that, all the kids went to that school, that sort of style. And, the whole place was like, a one-horse town, shall we say. It was so good, but it just expanded beautifully. And we were lucky enough to be invited to join Round Table, and that was an organisation with, well, as you know what it's like. It's not a charity organisation. It's an organisation which tries to help people. That's our main objective. And as such, although it was like that, it was a very, very social, shall we say. The people were, well, naturally of the same objectives and the same background and all the rest of it. So we all enjoyed one another's company. Plus the fact that we did work. We did charity work. Really good stuff. The biggest thing that has changed is that, particularly in South Africa, was the integration of this nation. In, let's say, in my day or my youth and all the rest of it, you know, everybody was so, they didn't have to be told that is where they were. And in fact, it's not only, well, I believe, it not only applied to the races, shall we say, but also to the way the white population worked itself. Not just from the religious point of view, but from it's the integration of, let's say, artisans, in inverted commas, bricklayers, carpenters, etc., and one would almost say, in inverted commas, the educated.
Were you in the army?
Was I in the army?
Yeah.
No, my father was.
Well,
I was still at school.
did you join national service afterwards?
Well, you know, one did that naturally. When I said what's the word I'm trying to find? We all had to join, you know, something. Or when I say we all had to, white boys. I was, whatever you want us to call it, we were stationed in Youngsfield, which is in Cape Town. So it's quite a long way away from Durban. And also when you're going by train, which took about 3 days and 3 nights.
Wow.
From Durban to Cape Town. So, you know, that was, and really there wasn't much down there, really speaking. First year I went down, there were only, I think, 14 or 15 of us in that particular klumpie. And it was quite an experience because I'd never been down that way. I don't think I'd been out of Natal before.
Was your father practicing Jew?
The what?
Was your father a practicing Jew?
No. When I say no, I mean I don't ever remember him going to synagogue. Just trying to think, you know, there was Auntie Renee and Auntie Renee and Jock. So in other words, Auntie Renee was the daughter, and Jock was Jock Nielsen. So he definitely was not Jewish. Let's try and think of anybody else. Of course, Sydney, he very definitely stuck to the rules, shall we say. A really super guy and a really super lady that he married, and so were the others that I can recall. But all the others from my mother's side were the ones that we, virtually had everything to do with. We lived upstairs in a family house. That was my mother and father and sister and myself. And down below were the other family.
What was it like growing up or being in a house surrounded by women?
I don't think it worried me too much, quite frankly, because, you know, it's one of those situations rather like, you know, Brian, make the tea. Brian, do this. You know, that's the kind of life that we led. The only thing was that there were no men, shall we say, around. So in other words, I didn't have, my father wasn't there, my uncles weren't there, they'd all gone away.
And when they came back,
Yes.
did anything change?
From what point of view, I wonder now, let's see. Here we have our, you know, our way of living didn't change, Brian. My father was my father, you know. He's the head of the department, shall we say. When the other uncles came back, they just went back to their jobs. In fact, when I consider that my one uncle, Uncle Les, naturally everybody started the war in the Royal Durban Light Infantry. It didn't last for very long because they wanted people to go and do certain jobs. So in other words, my uncle was a lithographer, shall we say, and they needed people to work in those sections. My father was also a printer. That was, you know, they needed people there rather than there. That's what you had to have, a backup.
And can you tell us about the royal visit?
The royal visit?
Yes, when was it?
1947, was it?
1947.
Or 40, well, I think it was a couple of years after the war, yeah. Brian, I cannot remember very much about it. To be quite honest, I didn't go flocking into town to see the King and Queen, or I just just wasn't there. But it was certainly, let's say, a huge occasion for South Africa, and being in one of the United Kingdom's main provinces, Natal. You know, we had so much to do with the royal visit. We were, let us say, in inverted commas, working class, okay? Now, that doesn't mean like those there and those here. We, well, my father was a printer, but, you know, he didn't own anything, he didn't have anything. On the one side of the family, they were all involved in the building trade. But they had their own company, so they all did very well. And then on my father's side, quite a few of them were involved in the, what do you call it? Clothing, tailoring, no, clothing, I think, more than anything else. So they did very well. Clothing was an up-and-coming business.
Can you tell us about your Unilever years?
When one thinks about it, there, you see, I can't even think of how long ago that was, when I started. But there was no such a thing as Unilever. It was Lever Brothers. They made soap, and they made soap, eh? What were the soaps? Lifebuoy, Sunlight. There were no powders around and such like things. That's what Unilever did. I mean, Lever Brothers did. Then they expanded. I mean, I just went with them. I was just there. But when one looks at a company, as you would say nowadays, it's so different. There it used to be like all companies, I would say, Brian, 100 people doing a job. Charlie did that, Harry did that, Jonathan did that, that was it. And old Bonnie and Sarah, they did the books. I mean, they did the books. I think adding machines had only just been invented. It's quite something when you think about it, how few years ago it was, you know, and you really compare it to, history, whatever you want to call it. But I think, Brian, the most significant incident, if one wants to call it, that happened in my period, although I was only 9 when it started, was the war. And that really changed, well, obviously it changed the world. But when one looks at it and looks at what happened to this country, that's what happened, you know, there it was. And don't forget, in this country there was a very heavy conflict as well between the British, shall we say, that was us, and the Boers, who didn't quite support the British in their efforts. It was really interesting, eh?
That's very interesting.
What you've got to try and imagine as well is when you go to Durban and you look out to sea, and you couldn't see anything else other than ships.
Wow.
That's quite something, eh?
That is. Ships for war.
And darting in between them, little corvettes and torpedo boats and goodness knows what all else. And there it was. And when you think about it, hey, Brian, the men involved in that sort of thing, we were a tiny part of it. It certainly changed the world, eh?
Certainly did. Probably for the better.
I think it did. I think people learnt a little bit from it. Well, obviously learnt a hell of a lot from it. To start off with, if you're going to have a conflict. So what does Mr. Hitler and company say? We'll teach those Russians a bloody lesson, eh? Kind of like 15 or 20 million men later.
Yeah.
Who learned what? Very sad, hey, Brian, to think that people, I think they still are like that. I think the one thing that kind of stops these things from escalating is that somebody says, do that, and you get the bomb.
What was it like raising 4 boys?
Oh, Well, first of all, Brian, I had to work there. And I really mean that. As Gordon will tell you, I used to get to work bloody early and come back, well, 6 o'clock was pretty late, but anyway. But, I think it was a fantastic, really, you've just got no idea that when you look back, not only on your life, my life, our life, because it's our life together. When you consider that there were two people who met, you see, and said hello and all the rest of it, and then decided to get engaged or whatever, we were okay, and must have admitted it raised some eyebrows, but anyway, there we were. And then the day that you are going to leave, to go on your leave, which takes us in on our honeymoon sort of style, that day, the boss, and I mean to say, the boss, Like there's God, there's the boss. Brian, oh shit! Now you're in trouble, because it was always your surname, Brian, yes sir. Well, you'll be very pleased to hear that I'll be there to have a couple of drinks to celebrate. Oh shit! That's 20 quid down the drain. Anyway, so there he was. Now, laddie, he was a laddie chap. So-and-so has resigned in Boxburg. Oh no, sir. Wow, that's bad luck, hey? Yes. And we would like you will take over. Oh my gosh, yes sir. That means you go to Boxburg. Oh, Transvaal. Yes. The only time I've been to the Transvaal was to go and play cricket and hockey. You will go. We'll let you go on honeymoon. And they meant that. It was the day I got back, my great Gore and I got back from honeymoon. We had a party at our flat, and that was it. And that's where we were. And then that meant we started our life together. Talk about from scratch. Oh boy. Well, let's just look at the family. I think that generally considering, Brian, looking at other families, we're not too bad, eh? I really think so. There are families where, talk about, the Americans are always a family feud, eh? Between you see, my mother came, as you know, from a large family, and there it was kind of like never the twain shall meet. They all stayed in one house. It was, so what? And then they all shuffled off in different directions. And I think, generally speaking, if one looks at what the word is, they didn't do too badly as far as achievements are concerned.